Before the Bell here on MMAOutbreakers.com. I'm Frank Trigg. That's Nick Kalikas. This week, I mean, unless you've been living in Iraq and locked up in a closet, it's UFC 202 week. You know, it's obviously Diaz and McGregor. If you've seen any of the highlights from the press conference, you know how crazy it became with the water bottle throwing. But let's not forget, this card is actually pretty good top to bottom. My understanding is it's going to open up with Uda and Vettori moves in with Magny and Larkin as the final fight on the early prelim fight pass, and of course gets into Diaz-McGregor with Johnson Teixeira as the co-main event. It's a great card top to bottom. We always talk about the main event, co-main event. Is there another fight on this card that you're actually looking forward to besides the main event or co-main event?
There's a few, man. I mean, honestly, like you just mentioned, the Magny Larkin fight, that should be tremendous. That fight is awesome. I mean, and to be basically a headliner on a prelims portion of a card, especially being the UFC Fight Pass, that says something right there. But I do get it. I understand that the UFC wants to kind of promote Fight Pass, and that's a big fight for Fight Pass to have. So I understand what they're doing with it. So yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to that fight. Also looking forward to Rick Story, Donald Cerrone as well. I think that's going to be a phenomenal fight. I mean, you can't go wrong with either fight. I think it's going to be talent. It's going to be excitement. They're both going to be really good fights.
The only other fight I'm looking forward to is the Means-Homasi fight, just because Means is coming off that 6-month suspension, and it was a very difficult, dark time in his life trying to get through this thing, believing that he is completely above board. He was doing everything correct. Had the supplement company check in with USADA to make sure their supplements were okay. They sent the ingredient list over. Everything was fine. You find out later that the supplement company lied, and they put extra supplements in there. 2 of them were actually on the ban list. That's how Tim gets popped. He goes to supplement company and says, look, this is what's happening. Help me get the lot number. Help me get these things. And they run a hightail, and they won't help him at all, and they leave him hanging out in the wind. And this is a friend of his that brought him into the supplement company, so Tim went through a really hard time. Not to mention he's also was trying to battle to get full custody of his daughters at the same time, in the middle of this whole thing, not being able to fight, spending attorney fees. If you look on MMA Oddsbreaker, you see the interview I had with Tim. He talks about $208,000 he lost. And that's what he's out of pocket right now, $208,000. Nick, I don't know about you, but a swing of $208,000 kind of hurts me a little bit if I get crushed with that.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. I mean, that's, it's unfortunate to even hear that whole situation, because I genuinely, believe that Tim Means everything that the situation it was that occurred with him. It is a shame. It shouldn't really go down like that. And it's tough with the supplements that these guys are taking over the counter, and they think that, hey, I'm good. I mean, it's a GNC. Most of these supplements that some of these guys are getting popped for are really over the counter stuff that has, like you said, some of the stuff that's on the ban list. So I do get it in that aspect. I mean, if they're really not shooting up steroids intentionally and all that, I mean, it's a shame, because some of these guys that really shouldn't be getting busted or shouldn't really be going through this drama, it's happening to, like a guy like Tim Means. I mean, I think overall the guy's a warrior. He's a great fighter. I mean, he seems to be upfront and honest about the whole situation. So I am looking forward to his fight as well. Because, man, I mean, he's in for a heck of a fight as well, because Homasi is a very tough opponent making a short notice debut. Those guys both like to stand and bang. So that's an exciting fight.
Yeah, amazingly good fight. And forgive me, I don't remember the name of the website, but Tim said, this is for the moms and dads at home that have kids in athletics. They're taking supplements now. There's a website that Tim talks about in the middle of the interview where now you can go check to see if that product that your son or daughter is taking, or anybody's taking, if you're an athlete taking yourself, if it's been cleared by USADA. Like, there's a website now to go see it where they've sent in the actual product for USADA to test and make, yeah, this is totally fine. As long as you make it this particular way, you're good to go. And that's what Tim does now. And he really backed down to just taking one of the creatines he was taking had one of the banned products in it. And so he doesn't take creatine anymore. So he's just on aminos and some electrolytes, and that's all he's taking besides food. That's it. And for Tim, that's huge, because it used to be, 25 pills a day of this thing, that thing, powders and mixes, and now all of a sudden he's like, nope, none of it. So the game is a-changing, Nick. The game is a-changing. It's clean up the sport. It's for the better. Let's get into why we're here, though. We got to talk about Anthony Johnson, Glover Teixeira. Anthony Johnson, number 1. Teixeira, number 2 contender. Amazing fighters, both guys. This one is very, very tough to call, especially because we've seen Anthony early in his career, how difficult it was for him to make weight, how bad he acted after a lot of his losses in his fights, and he kept hitting the fights after the whistle and doing all that kind of thing, and then took some time off, went to a minor league and put weight on, and really just finally grew up into his body size. Finally got big enough to be able to battle out. Now he's getting ready to battle Glover Teixeira for the number 1 contendership spot. How do you see this fight going down?
This is an awesome fight, too. It really is. I mean, both these guys are title contenders for a reason. I mean, they're both 2 of the best in the weight class. It's a tough one because Anthony Johnson is one of the hardest guys to deal with at light heavyweight. I mean, especially early on in the fight. I mean, if round one, even if it dips beyond round one a little bit. I mean, the guy is just a beast on the feet. He's got tremendous amount of knockout power. He's got speed. He's got athleticism. He has a decent chin. He's got the wrestling in most cases to keep the fight upright. So you have to deal with his striking. And a lot of people can't handle it. I mean, just look how close he was to seriously knocking out Daniel Cormier. I mean, he was almost wearing that strap. I mean, I think if Daniel Cormier was more human, I don't know how he took some of that punishment he did. Right now, we'd be talking about Anthony Johnson, being champion. So the guy is right there amongst all of the heavy hitters. I mean, better actually than most of those guys. I mean, he is a type of fighter that's always a threat to knock anybody out. So Glover has to be careful. And Glover's not exactly getting younger. He's been chin checked before. He's been wobbled a little bit before. So that is a concern. It probably plays out with Anthony Johnson getting an early KO. But look who the better fighter is, though, overall. I mean, Glover Teixeira is a tremendous fighter, man. I mean, he's got great striking, good boxing. He has awesome jiu-jitsu. I mean, underrated wrestling. The guy is the more complete fighter. So Glover legitimately has a shot to win this fight if he can kind of withstand the early pressure that Anthony Johnson's going to bring.
The thing with Glover, too, though, is that he's so well all around that people overlook his wrestling because he never really has to use wrestling because he's got such good timing in the middle of you punching, in the middle of throwing a punch at you. He's kind of stepping in and just barely knee tapping and you're falling over because he's really good at unbalancing you. I think with Johnson, though, he's going to have a really hard time unbalancing him because Johnson is he's so bottom heavy. His legs and they're so big, he just sits down on everything he does, and he really squats down to throw his punches, and it makes it very difficult to upend somebody like that. You got to catch him running at you or moving. I just don't know if Anthony's going to do that. But still, this fight is so interesting to see how this thing is going to break down. Like I really can't wait to see how this fight actually comes apart when the cage doors close. And I think John McCarthy is actually doing the main event, so I believe Herb Dean's got the co-main event. When he locked the door and he asked both fighters, "You ready?" That is going to be an amazing fight. I really am super excited for this fight to go off.
Yeah, I agree. I think it ends basically Anthony Johnson by KO or Glover subs him, honestly. I think Glover might get a takedown. It's going to be hard, though. Obviously, Anthony Johnson, not an easy guy to take down. But in a scramble, somehow along the way, maybe I could see Glover getting his back. And that is a weakness that Anthony Johnson has. I mean, if you take the guy's back, he's more than likely getting subbed, especially with the caliber of jiu-jitsu that Glover has. So I think it's probably going to be Glover by sub or Anthony Johnson by KO.
I think Johnson's going to win early and get the KO, but if it does go in the later rounds, then now we're talking Glover's going to be able to take over because once he gets a hold of you, he's able just to latch on and keep climbing up, and that takes a lot of energy to get a guy like that off. And we've all seen Anthony start to fade at the end because he is so explosive and powerful that he ends up using a lot of cardio early in the fight, and then in the later rounds, he just doesn't have it. So
yeah.
Let's talk about Diaz and McGregor. I mean, obviously the hype to the fight has been ongoing since the end of the last fight. I got to be honest with you. I've done a lot of radio interviews in and around LA and in and around Las Vegas, and everyone is asking me, like, how is McGregor the favorite in this fight if Diaz beat him up so significantly the first time? Like, how is it possible that McGregor's coming in as such a favorite? Can you go ahead and explain to folks at home why McGregor, even though he took a beating by Diaz, is still the favorite?
Well, he was like a 4-1, 5-1 favorite in some places in the first fight, and it's a rematch. So basically with that much respect the first time around, it's not a big shocker that the line's going to drastically be lower, but the same guy is still going to be favored a little bit. I opened at minus 130 for Conor McGregor, even money. And right now the line margins have tightened up, but it's still right there. It's minus 130 for McGregor right now. And it's plus 110 for Diaz. So it's a 20-cent line right now instead of 30. And it'll actually get tighter as the fight gets closer a little bit as well. So, man, it is a tough one. And I understand what people are thinking because there's a lot of people like the exact same thing that you just said, think that Nate Diaz should be favored in this fight because he did end up dominating him, especially on the ground. But let's not forget, Conor McGregor was winning the early part of that fight. I mean, his gas tank did let him down a little bit. That's one of the reasons why Diaz had a little bit more success as the fight progressed a little bit and was able to finish the fight. But Diaz is going to have a full camp now this time as well. So you can argue both sides, and a lot of people are. I mean, the sports books are getting pounded with two-way action on this fight. Early on, it was Nate Diaz getting all the love. Like you said, again, people believe that he should be favored. But now as we get closer to fight time, a lot of bettors are coming in on Conor McGregor. He has a huge fan base, as we all know. I mean, he's arguably, if you can't even maybe argue it, I mean, he's the most popular fighter in the UFC right now. Ronda Rousey at one point could kind of, hang in there with him, but he's the man, and he still has that draw. He still has that power. Anytime he runs his mouth, he draws all sorts of attention. I mean, look at the press conference, like you mentioned as well. That was nuts, and it's going to actually be great for the UFC, right? They're going to do way more pay-per-view sales because of that craziness that took place.
It hit every single sports talk radio, sports talk show. The highlights of that press conference with Conor literally throwing his bottle from his seat and then getting up like a crazed freaking leprechaun that he is, grabbed the bottles off the table and just chucked them at the Diaz camp. It was the best unscripted television you could possibly happen before a fight comes out. I mean, and let's be honest, our sport is growing so quickly that every week there's about 100,000 more fans that have never seen a fight before are now watching it, and 80% of that is because of Conor McGregor in his mouth. So 80% of the fans that are coming in, so like 80,000 every week, they're coming now to watch the sport, are doing so because Conor McGregor. They're coming in because of the way he talks, the way he acts, and then when he fights, the way he wins. And that's just why everyone gets on board with him. So I can't fault the line for being for McGregor, but with that being said, and before you give us your prediction, Diaz is kicking his ass again. That's just what's going to happen. He's had a full 8-week training camp, and his brother been locked up off in the corner. Yancy Madero's been out there for the last month. He went to Vegas. Obviously, Conor went to Vegas like 8 weeks ago to get prepared for the fight because of time change and all that coming in from Ireland. Diaz got there about 2 weeks ago, but Yancy Madero from Hawaii has been up there training, getting him ready. Like it's been a full-blown, put-together training camp for Nate Diaz. And he took that kind of punishment in that kind of shape the first time. He could pretty much box him with his hands down and just take the beating again for the first 2 rounds because he's in so much better shape now that he's still going to be able to beat Conor. I just don't see he's bigger, he's longer, he's got better ground game, which is obviously showed in the first fight. I really don't see a way that Conor McGregor can win. I just don't see it. He can't hit him hard enough to knock him out. So how's he going to win?
Well, I do think he's got knockout power still. I understand what you're saying, and I agree with you, but that is the way he wins, honestly. I think because he came close a few times. And you make great points right now. Nate should be able to absorb punishment even better, right? I mean, he is in great shape compared to the first time. So you definitely make an outstanding point. But he was getting clipped in that fight, pretty often and pretty hard by Conor McGregor. I actually had money on Nate Diaz in the first fight. And, with some of those punches getting through, I was like, oh, man, I don't want Nate to take more of these, man. I mean, I was sweating it. There's no doubt because Conor was bringing it early on. So in that case, I think that, Conor McGregor is talented enough. He's got the speed, he's got the power, he's got the accuracy that he could probably knock Nate out. But I agree. I don't think it's going to happen, though. And I do agree with you overall. I think that Nate Diaz is just the better fighter. And as this fight progresses, even if Conor's winning early on, Nate Diaz will eventually take over, probably finish it on the ground again, I think is what it breaks down to. And I expect Nate to actually have more success early on in this fight on the feet with his boxing. I mean, look at some of the fighters that Nate has really, in his history in the UFC, he's faced some great strikers. You could throw Cerrone in that mix. You could throw Michael Johnson in that mix. And he's handled those guys relatively well. And those guys are definitely good strikers. So now Conor McGregor again, I mean, he had his moments in the first fight as well with his boxing. So I think Nate's going to be confident. He knows he can beat him. He knows, especially on the ground, he's going to have a huge advantage. And Conor McGregor's camp said they're going to be a little bit more disciplined and they're going to try to kind of pace themselves a little bit better. You cannot let Nate Diaz start getting off that jab and start getting confidence early on because I think Conor's just going to get lit up even more if that's the case. So, yes, I'm with you. I think there is value on Nate Diaz as a dog, and that's the way to go, I think. It's a dog or pass situation, and Nate Diaz obviously being the dog, and I think he is the better fighter overall. There's some value there.
So in the co-main event, we both had Johnson winning the fight, but I didn't actually ask you, where's your money going to go on the co-main event with Johnson and Teixeira?
That one, it's a little tough because I do, like you said too, I think Anthony Johnson probably knocks him out early. But if it doesn't happen, I think Johnson gets beat. So will I lay 2-1? I mean, the number right now, I'm going to look over at 5 dimes as we speak. It is currently minus 190 for Johnson, and Glover is coming in at plus 165. So at that line right there, it keeps me away because I don't want to lay the juice almost 2-1 on Anthony Johnson because Glover's so good. You don't want to kind of take the risk and bet that much against him. But at the same time, I don't know if I want to take a stab at Glover either because I do think he should probably get knocked out at this point of his career against a stud like Anthony Johnson on the feet. So I think Johnson knocks him out. I'm probably going to stay away from this fight. But if anything, it is a dog or pass situation because, again, as we were talking about the Nate Diaz fight, we know that as the fight progresses, if Glover makes it to round 2, it's going to get interesting. I think those takedowns might actually come in round 2 that probably won't come in round 1, or in round 3 if it makes it that long. So, Glover has some advantage in this fight. That's why it's dog or pass, but I would probably pass where I'm at right now.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I checked 5 dimes earlier today, and I think the over-under on the Diaz-McGregor fight was 2.5 rounds. Is that still the case? Did I read that right? Okay.
Yes, it is 2.5 rounds under minus 130.
Before knowing that, I was on ESPN radio in Las Vegas, and they were like, how long do you think this fight's going to go if there's going to be a finish? Like, well, I think Diaz finishes him before the middle of the second round. And then later, the next day, when it looked like, oh, the over-under is 2.5, so I guess I'm kind of right in my bet. But it's still, that's a difficult one to pick. Like, that extra over-under is really hard to pick in both these fights.
It is. Yep.
It could happen early, either guy. It could happen late, either guy. And now you got to really guess. You're not trying to guess which one's going to win. You're trying to guess when the fight's going to finish. Like, wow, that's really tough. Early now or late now that both guys are at camp. They're both in better shape. So what's really going to happen? So that one, these fights, matchmaking wise, are amazing. These are really good fights. And like I said, on this one, I'm taking Diaz. My money would go on Diaz if I was going to bet on it. And then with the Johnson-Teixeira fight, I'm agreeing with Nick. I'm taking Johnson, but I would leave it alone if I was going to bet on this one. I'm definitely not going to touch it just because it's way too close for me to like. And really, that one I can just enjoy. I can just sit around and enjoy that fight and not have to worry about where my money's coming or going. Yeah, I totally agree with you. That's the way to go with this card. All right, that's Nick Kalikas. I'm Frank Trigg. This is it for this week on Before the Bell. See you again next week here at MMAOddsbreaker.com.